I wasn't even going to go. That might sound overly dramatic, but if you've ever been slowly erased from the story of your own family, you'll understand. My sister Danielle has always been the narrator of our shared history, and she writes me out with astonishing ease. She's the oldest, 3 years ahead of me, but 10 steps louder. From the time we were kids, she was the firework, and I was the flickering candle in the corner. Danielle had a way of entering a room and making people laugh before she even spoke. Me? I was usually already there, setting the table or helping mom with the dishes, unnoticed. At school, she was prom queen. At home, she was the queen of everything. And somehow, she convinced everyone, especially our parents, that it was natural for her to shine and natural for me to stay in the shadows. Dad never meant to choose sides. I truly believe that. He just never noticed the choices being made for him. So when his 65th birthday dinner was announced, a catered affair at the Greystone, no less, I imagined I'd be tucked quietly into the evening like a polite placeholder. And I was okay with that, until Danielle called me 2 days before the event. She didn't even say hello. "Hey, just FYI," she began, already in motion. "No speeches from you, okay? I've got the program tight. Toasts, slideshow, thank yous. I'm covering it all." I waited for the laugh, the teasing smirk I could latch onto as a joke, but none came. "Dad wants something polished," she added, her voice syrupy and sharp. "Not, rambling stories about the time he fixed your bike." She meant that literally. I had written a few thoughts down, one of which was about that exact story. I hadn't told anyone, but somehow she knew, and she wanted it gone. I don't know why her words stung more than usual that night. Maybe it was the casual cruelty or the finality of her tone. Maybe it was how old I felt, 31 and still being pushed into silence like I was the annoying little sister with jelly on her hands. I could have said something. I could have pushed back. But my default has always been to keep the peace. That's the role I was assigned, not just by her, but by the rhythm of our family. Danielle stirred the waters. I smoothed them over. So I swallowed it. Again. Still, I bought a dress. Not too loud, not too dull. A soft plum color that made me feel like myself. I wrote my speech anyway, not out of rebellion, but because it felt like a way to hold on to something. A small truth that was mine. I wrapped Dad's gift, an antique pocket compass I found at a vintage shop, engraved with his initials, and slipped a card inside with handwriting I rewrote 3 times, hoping it would feel right. Hoping I would feel right, if only for one night. Then I walked into the Greystone, clutching that little folded speech in my purse, a smile stretched across my face like polished armor. I didn't know yet if I'd speak, but I had words, and for once, they were mine. The room looked like it had been lifted from a wedding catalog, all soft lighting and deliberate elegance. The long banquet table was draped in a snow-white cloth that shimmered under the chandelier's golden glow. Tall taper candles flickered gently in gold holders, casting elongated shadows across the fine china and crystal stemware. A string quartet in the far corner played a version of Clair de Lune, so delicate it sounded like it might shatter if you listened too closely. Danielle moved through it all like she was the bride at her own event, not our father's daughter. Her navy gown fit like it had been sewn onto her, each movement fluid and intentional. She laughed at just the right volume, made eye contact in 3-second bursts, rushed shoulders with old family friends, as if reconnecting with the fan base. She belonged in the center of attention, and she knew it, or at least, she needed to believe she did. And me, she put me at the far end of the table, not by accident. Uncle Henry to my left, who mostly stared into his soup and hadn't heard a word since 2017. Aunt Janet to my right, who said nothing unless it was to complain about traffic or mild indigestion. It was a dead zone. I might as well have been seated at the staff table in the kitchen. Danielle was methodical in her sidelining, not rude, never overt, just quietly strategic. She positioned me out of sightlines, far from the center, away from any potential to disrupt her narrative of the night. And maybe it would have worked. Maybe I would have disappeared right on cue, if it hadn't been for Dad. I watched him all through dinner. His smile was polite but tired, the kind of expression someone wears when they've been gifted a memory that isn't quite theirs. Danielle recounted classic stories from our childhood, the time she rescued me from falling off the swing set, the family trip to Cape Cod she swore she organized at age 16. Most of it wasn't just exaggerated, it was fabricated. He nodded through it all, clinking his fork against his wine glass in support. But he wasn't really in it. His eyes drifted toward me sometimes, just for a second, and then away again. By the time dessert was cleared, Danielle was standing with her champagne flute in hand. She tapped it with a silver ring for attention, her voice already rising with that perfectly rehearsed inflection. And that's when Dad stood up. He moved slowly, deliberately, and cleared his throat. Not loud, but just enough to command the room. Every conversation halted. Danielle froze mid-sentence, her mouth still forming the word legacy. Before we raise our glasses, Dad said, voice steady, I'd like to ask Brooke to say a few words. Silence. Actual, humming, breathless silence. 50 heads turned toward me at once. Danielle turned too, her body stiff. Her smile dropped so fast it might have hit the floor. Her eyes locked onto mine, confusion first, then disbelief, and just beneath that, fury carefully restrained behind a twitching jaw. And I didn't move at first. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. The folded paper in my purse suddenly felt heavy, like it was made of lead, or maybe something even more fragile. But Dad was looking at me now. Not past me, not through me. At me. His expression was calm, proud, as if this moment had been his plan all along. I rose slowly, knees shaking, breath shallow. The paper trembled in my grip. Danielle sat down without a word. And I began to speak. I don't remember the exact words that left my mouth, only the way they cracked through the air like something long buried finally breaking the surface. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. My voice was a whisper at first, tight in my throat, strangled by years of self-editing. But then I looked at Dad, just him, not the 50 strangers watching, not the tension radiating from Danielle's clenched jaw, just Dad, sitting there with his hands folded gently in his lap, eyes locked on mine, like I was the only voice in the world he wanted to hear. And suddenly, I remembered why I wrote that speech at all. I started with the story of my first job interview. I was 22, terrified, convinced I wasn't good enough. My resume was flimsy, my suit too big. I had called Dad that morning in a panic. He showed up 10 minutes later in his old pickup truck and said, "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be you, and that's enough." I told the room how he sat with me in the parking lot for half an hour, helping me rehearse answers, how he waited in the truck the entire time I was inside. When I came out, nearly in tears, he handed me a chocolate bar and said, "That's the face of someone who just leveled up." I hadn't gotten the job, but he made me feel like I'd won something bigger. I shared moments like that, quiet ones, the kind that don't make it into photo albums or slideshows, but build a life brick by brick. The time he drove across town at midnight when my car broke down. The way he always asked about my writing, even when no one else did. The day I told him I was scared I'd never measure up, and he told me I already had. As I spoke, the room shifted. The laughter was soft and genuine when I recalled Dad's terrible dad jokes. A ripple of chuckles at the part where he tried to braid my hair once and tied it into a knot so tight we had to cut it out. But then came the silence. The kind of silence that holds space. Heavy, reverent, like they could feel what I was feeling. I spoke about his integrity, his refusal to compromise his values even when it made things harder. I said his strength was the kind that didn't need to raise its voice, the kind that sits beside you in the dark and waits until you can breathe again. That his quiet taught me that being overlooked doesn't mean you aren't valuable. It just means your voice hasn't been heard yet. By the time I finished, I could feel something loosen inside me, like my spine had straightened, like my breath had found its rhythm. There was a beat of stillness, then clapping, at first polite, then louder, fuller. A few people even stood. I wasn't expecting that, hadn't asked for it, but I received it, not as praise, but as permission. Permission to take up space. I looked at Dad. Tears welled in his eyes, catching the candlelight. He didn't say anything. He just gave me a small nod. One hand pressed to his chest like he was trying to keep his heart from spilling out. Danielle didn't clap. She sat rigid in her chair, lips pressed into a single sharp line. Her champagne flute trembled in her fingers. Her eyes, usually hard and controlled, glistened, though not from joy, not from pride. But it didn't matter, because for the first time in my life, the room had heard me, and I had heard myself. The hallway outside the restrooms was narrow and dimly lit, the kind of space meant for quick exits and private phone calls, not the sudden collision of old grievances. But that's where she found me. Danielle. I had just splashed cold water on my face, trying to steady my breath, when I heard the sharp click of heels approaching. Fast, controlled, like someone marching toward a verdict they'd already written. She didn't waste time. "Did you plan that?" she asked, voice like glass under pressure, smooth on the surface, seconds from cracking. I turned toward her, still holding the edges of the marble sink. Her arms were crossed, jaw tight, a forced smile barely concealing what roiled underneath. "No," I said evenly, but I was ready. Her scoff was immediate, loud, brittle. "Of course, you're always ready to make it about you, aren't you? Always the victim, always poor, overlooked broke." I didn't flinch, not this time. Maybe a few years ago, even a few months ago, that jab would have pierced something deep. But now it just felt tired, rehearsed, and I was done playing the role she wrote for me. I straightened and faced her fully, meeting her eyes, not with anger, not even defiance, just clarity. "You think I wanted that moment because of you?" I asked softly. "Danielle, I wasn't trying to take anything from you. I just wanted to speak, that's all. I just needed to be heard." For a second, she didn't respond. Her expression flickered, something unguarded behind her perfectly applied makeup. And for the first time in my life, I didn't see her as powerful. I didn't see her as the one who always won. I saw her for what she was, terrified, desperate to control the spotlight because she had convinced herself it was the only thing keeping her relevant. The applause, the attention, it was oxygen to her. And someone else breathing beside her felt like suffocation. "I don't need to outshine you," I said, and meant it. "This isn't a competition. It never was, not for me." Her lips parted like she wanted to respond, but nothing came, just silence. She blinked, once, twice, and then turned, walked away. Her heels echoed down the hallway, each step louder than the last. They didn't sound like power anymore. They sounded like retreat. I waited a moment before re-entering the dining room. The music had softened. Guests were chatting in small clusters, refilling drinks, hugging goodbye. But Dad was waiting by the far wall, alone, holding his empty wine glass like it had been forgotten in his hand. When he saw me, he smiled, not wide, not for show, just this small, unmistakably real smile that said everything without saying a word. He pulled me into a hug, one of those tight, still hugs you never forget. I could feel his chest rise and fall against mine. "I'm sorry," he murmured into my hair. "I should have asked you years ago." And just like that, something in me gave way. Not pain, not bitterness, but relief. Pure, unfiltered relief. Like someone had finally turned the volume up on my life after years of it being muted. Because it wasn't about winning. It was about being seen. And finally, I was. After that night, something subtle but unmistakable shifted, not just in how others saw me, but in how I saw myself. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a few messages from relatives. A couple of them were surprisingly heartfelt. One uncle wrote, "Didn't know you had that in you, kid." Another simply said, "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." I read them in bed, still in my dress from the night before, mascara smudged beneath my eyes, my speech folded like a relic on the nightstand. But what really caught me off guard was Dad. He called that afternoon. No agenda, no birthday logistics or reminders to send a thank you card. Just, "Hi, sweetheart. I was thinking about you." That became a rhythm. He started calling more, sometimes just to talk, sometimes with no real reason at all. We went out to lunch a week later. Just the two of us. A quiet booth in a cafe near the park where we used to fly kites when I was little. The kind of place that served soup in chipped porcelain bowls and never rushed you out. He asked about my writing. Not just "how's it going," but specific questions. What I was working on, what inspired me lately, if I ever thought about publishing. It was the kind of curiosity I'd always hoped for, but never dared expect. And more than asking, he listened. No distracted glances at his watch, no soft sighs that suggested he had somewhere more important to be. He was fully there, with me. And maybe that's what changed the most, the space I was allowed to occupy, a space I no longer felt guilty for filling. Danielle, on the other hand, went silent. Weeks passed without a word. I didn't push. I figured she needed time to reshape the world in her head, where she was always the sun and the rest of us orbited politely. Then, months later, I text. No greeting, no emojis. Just, I watched your speech again. Mom sent me the video. You were good. That was it. 7 words. Flat, cautious, and wrapped in ellipses. But I stared at that message for a long time. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a thank you. But it was acknowledgement. And from Danielle, that was something close to a miracle. I didn't reply right away. I didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It wasn't punishment or avoidance. It just was. A space, finally allowed to breathe. Because here's the truth. I didn't give that speech to hurt her. I didn't do it to stake a claim or steal a spotlight. I spoke because I mattered too. Because I had carried decades of silence in my chest like a second ribcage, stiff, protective, but suffocating. And I was finally ready to take a full breath. That night didn't make me the star of the story. It just let me be in it. Sometimes justice doesn't come from shouting the loudest or proving someone wrong. Sometimes it comes gently, in the weight of your father's hand on your shoulder, his voice warm with pride, in a room full of people who never expected you to speak, listening. Sometimes justice is being heard, and for the first time in a long time, I was.